The gentle hum of the refrigerator was usually the loudest sound in my kitchen. It was a comforting, steady presence, a soundtrack to the quiet life I had built here in Maple Creek, Ohio. My name is Astrid Olson, and at 38, I finally felt like I had found my sanctuary. My small home, nestled on a street lined with mature maples and oak trees, was meticulously kept, reflecting the methodical nature I brought to every aspect of my life. I loved the sense of order, the predictability of my days, the way the morning light streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peace-hard one, after years of navigating turbulent waters in a previous community, where my name had been dragged through the mud by baseless rumors, leaving scars that, though faded, still served as potent reminders. That past experience had sharpened my senses, honing my perception of human behavior. I'd learned to read between the lines, to spot the subtle tells of manipulation, the carefully constructed facades that hid darker intentions. It was why, when the insistent knock came at my front door just after noon on a Tuesday, a ripple of unease, a faint tremor of what I recognized as a premonition, ran through me. I opened the door to find my next-door neighbor, a man I knew only as Mr. Henderson. He stood there, shifting his weight from foot to foot, a forced smile plastered across his face. His eyes, though, darted nervously, avoiding mine, and his posture seemed almost too casual, like a stage actor trying to appear relaxed. He was in his late 50s, I guessed, with a perpetually rumpled look about him, even in clean clothes. He had moved in with his wife, Mrs. Henderson, about 6 months ago. They were a couple who, despite living so close, I knew little about, primarily because they seemed to keep to themselves, at least where I was concerned. "Astrid, my dear neighbor," he began, his voice a little too boisterous for a Tuesday afternoon. "Hope I'm not disturbing you. Just a quick question, if you wouldn't mind." My internal alarm bells, fine-tuned by years of experience, began to jingle softly. It wasn't the words, but the way he delivered them, laden with an unctuous quality that felt disingenuous. I remained polite, my face neutral, masking the slight tension that had begun to coil in my stomach. "Not at all, Mr. Henderson. How can I help you?" He cleared his throat, pushing his hands into his pockets. "Well, you see, a bit of a predicament here. My wife and I, completely forgot to pay our internet bill this month. Just slipped our minds, you know how it is. And wouldn't you know it, they cut us off. Just like that, no warning." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Anyway, we were wondering perhaps if we could, connect to your Wi-Fi, just for a few days until we get things sorted out. It would be a lifesaver." The request itself wasn't outlandish, but the casualness of it, coupled with the flimsy excuse, immediately raised my hackles. Forgot to pay? Who truly forgot to pay a bill as essential as internet in this day and age? And for it to be disconnected so swiftly without a single warning implied a much deeper issue, perhaps a history of missed payments or an outright refusal. My mind, ever the methodologist, began to piece together probabilities. Offering my Wi-Fi wasn't just about sharing a password. It was about opening my digital door to them, an unknown quantity. It felt like a small invasion, a precursor to something larger. "I appreciate you asking, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "And I certainly understand the frustration of being without internet. However, I have a service that is specifically configured for my needs, and I'm quite particular about my network security. Connecting unknown devices, even a neighbor's, introduces a risk I'm not comfortable taking. I just can't risk any vulnerabilities with my personal information." I offered a small, apologetic smile. "I hope you understand." His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation that he quickly tried to mask. His shoulders stiffened and the fake casualness vanished. "Oh, right, security, of course." The words were clipped and his eyes finally met mine, but they held a cold glint that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a look of disdain, of accusation, as if I had personally wronged him. "Well, fine then, thanks anyway." He spun on his heel and walked away, not a word more, not even a customary goodbye. The screen door of his house slammed shut a moment later, echoing the abrupt end of our exchange. I closed my own door slowly, the earlier unease now solidifying into a distinct premonition of trouble. My perceptive nature told me this wasn't the end of it. His reaction was too strong, too petulant for a simple refusal. It was as if he had expected me to say yes, and my no had thrown a wrench into some unseen plan. I walked back to my kitchen, the peaceful hum of the refrigerator no longer quite so soothing. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this brief interaction had just opened the door to a chapter of conflict I hadn't invited. The question that lingered, hanging in the quiet air of my home, was what form this uninvited conflict would take. What would be their next move in response to my simple refusal to share my private network? And how would I, Astrid Olsen, the quiet witness who now found herself at the center of an unfolding drama, navigate it? For others seeking to understand similar neighborhood dynamics, I often recommend that you subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. It can be surprising how common these issues are. The days that followed were initially quiet, a deceptive calm that my perceptive nature refused to trust. I went about my routines, watering my meticulously pruned rose bushes, tending to my small vegetable patch, and enjoying my morning coffee on the porch swing. But I felt a subtle shift in the neighborhood atmosphere, an almost imperceptible tightening of the air. It started with small things. Mr. Henderson would be in his yard, ostensibly tending to his own sparse grass, and when I stepped outside, his head would snap up, his eyes meeting mine in a glare that lingered a second too long before he'd turn away. Mrs. Henderson, who usually offered a perfunctory nod, now avoided my gaze entirely, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Then came the first confirmation of my suspicions. It was a warm Saturday morning, and I was watering my petunias when old Mrs. Albright from 2 houses down walked by with her small terrier, Muffin. Mrs. Albright was a sweet, gossipy woman but kind at heart. She stopped by my fence, ostensibly to admire my flowers. "Oh, Astrid, your petunias are just lovely this year," she chirped, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Say, I heard something rather interesting about you. From the Hendersons. They were saying you're quite the..." Well, the word they used was selfish, and lacking a sense of community. All because of your internet, apparently. Is that true? My breath hitched. The casualness with which she delivered the blow didn't lessen its impact. It hit precisely where my past trauma lay, the fear of being unfairly maligned, of having my character assassinated by baseless whispers. My stomach clenched, and a cold dread spread through me. So my suspicions were correct. They were indeed bad-mouthing me. The internet excuse was just a flimsy pretext for their true grievance, my refusal to cater to their entitlement. "I simply declined to share my private Wi-Fi network, Mrs. Albright," I explained, keeping my voice calm, though my hands trembled slightly as I held the watering can. "For security reasons." I explained that to Mr. Henderson. Mrs. Albright's brow furrowed. "Well, they're telling everyone it wouldn't cost you a thing, and you just don't care about helping people out." "Mr. Henderson even called you cheap to my face, said he couldn't believe how unneighborly you were." She patted my arm sympathetically. "Don't worry, dear, I told them it wasn't like you. You're always so polite." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only fueled the fire in my gut. Cheap, selfish, lacking a sense of community. These weren't just casual insults. They were direct attacks on my character, designed to isolate me, to turn the very neighbors I had sought peace among against me. This wasn't a minor disagreement. This was a deliberate campaign, and it resonated with a painful echo from my past, a past I had moved to Maple Creek to escape. My motivation for peace in this new community now directly clashed with their insidious attempt to disrupt it. I thanked Mrs. Albright, my voice a little tighter than I would have liked, and watched her walk away. My hands, which had been so steady pruning roses just moments before, now felt heavy and useless. The anger, slow and simmering, began to rise. This was beyond rude. It was malicious. And my methodical mind, which usually sought patterns and order, now began to seek a strategy. I needed to understand the full extent of their lies, and then, more importantly, I needed to figure out how to dismantle them without sinking to their level. The question now wasn't just what form the conflict would take, but how I could use my traits, my perception, my patience, and my methodical approach, to expose their true nature and restore the peace I craved. The initial shock of hearing their slander quickly morphed into a steely resolve. My past experience had taught me that reacting emotionally, especially by confronting a manipulator directly, only gave them more ammunition. Instead, I retreated into my methodical nature. I began a detailed log, a simple notebook labeled Maple Creek Observations. Inside, I meticulously recorded every interaction, every perceived slight, every piece of information that confirmed their whispers. The first entry was the date of Mr. Henderson's Wi-Fi request. Then, Mrs. Albright's report, including the exact words she quoted. "Selfish, lacking a sense of community, cheap." I noted the time of day, the context, and my internal reaction. This wasn't just a diary. It was the foundation of an evidence binder, built on the premise that truth, meticulously documented, would eventually speak for itself. The badmouthing, like a subtle poison, began to spread. I noticed fewer friendly waves from passing cars. Neighbors who used to chat over fences now offered quick, almost strained smiles before hurrying away. My social life, though never extensive, began to feel like it was shrinking. The quiet peace I had cherished was subtly fracturing. My routine walks around the block, once a source of tranquility, now felt like an exercise in navigating unspoken judgment. I saw groups of neighbors gathered in driveways, and when my path brought me near, conversations would abruptly cease, eyes would glance my way, and then quickly divert. My perception, a trait I usually valued, now felt like a curse, keenly picking up every nuance of their manufactured disdain. One afternoon, I heard Mrs. Henderson talking loudly to Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street. Mrs. Rodriguez was generally a very kind woman. "Can you believe some people?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried clearly over the slight breeze. "So unwelcoming. You'd think in a community like this, people would look out for each other. But no, some are just greedy." The words were obviously meant for my ears, dripping with passive aggression. I was in my garden pulling weeds, my back to them, but I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. My hands tightened around the stem of a dandelion. This was psychological warfare, designed to make me feel small, isolated, and defensive. I didn't react. I continued to pull weeds, slowly, methodically, my patience a shield against their provocations. But inside, a quiet rage began to simmer. This was more than just gossip. This was a deliberate attempt to poison my reputation, to make me an outcast in my own home, in my chosen sanctuary. My motivation, the deep-seated need to prevent another cycle of baseless rumors from destroying my peace, intensified. I couldn't let them succeed. Not again. The direct attacks began subtly, then escalated. First, it was the Hendersons starting their lawnmower at precisely 7:00 a.m. on Saturdays, just as I was enjoying my quiet coffee on the porch. Then their dog, a small yappy terrier, began barking incessantly, specifically when I was in my yard. It wasn't constant, but it would erupt into a frenzy of barks the moment I stepped outside, continuing until I retreated indoors. I logged it all: date, time, duration, the precise moment the barking started and stopped in relation to my movements. My notebook filled with details. Then came the property line transgressions. Overgrown branches from their neglected bushes started to intrude further and further onto my side, scratching against my fence. A discarded fast food cup appeared on the very edge of my lawn, right where our properties met. Coincidence? Perhaps once. But when it happened 3 times in a week, always out of reach for a casual gust of wind, my methodical mind registered it as a pattern of deliberate disrespect. I decided it was time for a more formal approach, to exhaust all conventional avenues. My patience, though strained, dictated this step. I reached out to the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. I didn't mention the Wi-Fi incident or the badmouthing directly. Instead, I filed a polite, formal complaint about the noise disturbances from their dog and the encroaching foliage. I included the dates and times from my log. A week later, I received a generic email from the Homeowners Association, stating that they had sent a courtesy letter to the Hendersons regarding their property maintenance. There was no mention of the dog. For a few days, the dog barking did lessen, and Mr. Henderson trimmed back the most egregious branches. A small victory, I thought, a minor payoff for my efforts. But then it started again, the barking just as frequent, the branches slowly creeping back. It was a clear sign they had simply placated the HOA, not genuinely addressed the issue. The Hendersons hadn't learned their lesson. They were simply biding their time. My patient approach was slowly being worn down. Each minor resolution was followed by a renewed provocation, more insidious than the last. One afternoon, I saw Mrs. Henderson on the street corner, chatting with several other neighbors. As I passed, I distinctly heard her say, "Honestly, the nerve of some people. Always complaining about every little thing. Some folks just aren't happy unless they're making trouble." Her eyes, sharp and condemning, flicked to me. It was infuriating. I was the one trying to maintain peace, and they were painting me as the aggressor, the troublemaker. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. My methodical notes were becoming a testament to their calculated campaign of psychological warfare. I had tried the patient approach, the formal channels, and they had scoffed at them. This was progress of a sort, but not in the direction I wanted. It was progressing towards a deeper, more entrenched conflict. The question now was how much more I could endure before their tactics pushed me to my breaking point. Every small setback, every new nuisance, was tightening the coil of frustration inside me. I began to consider that conventional methods might not be enough to break through their manipulative shell. For those wondering how deep these neighborly conflicts can go, I suggest you subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The stories there reveal the true depths of human pettiness and resilience. The constant low-level harassment began to chip away at my tranquility. The incessant barking, the glaring eyes, the subtle snubs from other neighbors, it was a steady drip of poison. My home, once my sanctuary, began to feel less like a haven and more like a besieged fortress. I found myself instinctively looking out the window before stepping outside, checking for their presence. I timed my errands to avoid seeing them, changing my routine, a silent admission that their actions were impacting my life. My methodical logging continued, but the entries grew heavier, tinged with despair. June 14th, 7:05 a.m., Henderson dog barking, 15 minutes nonstop, aimed at my backyard as I hung laundry. June 17th, 3:30 p.m., noticed 2 new empty soda cans near property line, 1 foot onto my grass, had not been there 2 hours prior. These were small things, yes, but their cumulative effect was immense. My sleep grew restless. I often woke up with a sense of dread, anticipating the day's next provocation. The joy I once found in my garden felt diminished, overshadowed by the knowledge that I was under constant, watchful, malevolent scrutiny. The Homeowners Association had done little more than send a generic letter. When I followed up, their representative, a well-meaning but overwhelmed woman named Carol, simply stated, "We can't really do much unless there are repeated, documented violations that affect the entire community, Astrid. This sounds like a personal dispute." Her words, though not intentionally dismissive, felt like a slap in the face. It made me feel unheard and worse, isolated. My precise documentation, my patient attempts to follow protocol, seemed to count for nothing. One evening, my only real confidant in Maple Creek, a kind woman named Sarah who lived a few blocks away, came over for tea. I poured out the story, the Wi-Fi request, the slander, the escalating passive aggression. Sarah, a sensible and empathetic woman, listened patiently. "Astrid, this is terrible," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "But what can you do? They're just so awful. It sounds like they enjoy making you miserable." Her words hit hard. They enjoy making you miserable. The thought, though I had tried to avoid it, had been lurking in the back of my mind. It wasn't about the Wi-Fi or a misunderstanding. It was about control, about power, about their twisted satisfaction in seeing me squirm. The realization brought a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. My patience, usually a deep well, felt like it was finally running dry. I remembered the sting of the baseless rumors in my old community, the feeling of my reputation crumbling around me, and the helpless fury of being unable to stop it. That trauma had resurfaced, haunting my nights and shadowing my days. I saw the Hendersons mirroring those past tormentors, feeding off my quiet distress, determined to destroy the peace I had worked so hard to build. I felt utterly trapped, caught in a snare of their making, with no clear way out. This was my rock bottom. My quiet nature felt like a weakness, my methodical approach impotent against their sheer malice. I sat there, staring at the steam rising from my teacup, a hollow ache in my chest. What was the point of all my careful logging, my adherence to rules, my quiet endurance, if it led only to more suffering? I felt despair beginning to creep in, a dark, heavy blanket threatening to smother my resolve. Could I truly be forced to endure this indefinitely, or worse, be driven from my home again by the petty vindictiveness of a pair of toxic neighbors? This was the ultimate payoff of their campaign, my complete emotional exhaustion. The question that clawed at me now was whether I would succumb to this despair, or whether this profound low point would ignite something new within me, a different kind of fight. The despair, though potent, lasted only a few hours. By late evening, it began to curdle into something else, a cold, focused fury. My methodical mind, having processed the raw emotion, started to analyze the problem with renewed clarity. I was Astrid Olsen, perceptive, patient, and methodical, and I was done being a victim. My motivation to prevent similar damage in my new neighborhood flared into a burning certainty. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting the very fabric of peace in Maple Creek. My role as the quiet witness and disseminator of truth suddenly took on a new, more active meaning. I had been witnessing, yes, but I hadn't been disseminating effectively. I had tried formal channels, but the Hendersons were too clever, too adept at operating in the gray areas. What they understood was public opinion, and what they thrived on was manipulation. My approach had to be precise, undeniable, and above all, subtle enough to turn their own tactics against them. I pulled out my Maple Creek Observations notebook. It was thick now, filled with dates, times, specific instances. But it was missing something critical, proof beyond my own word. I needed objective, undeniable evidence, and I needed to understand their motivations, their vulnerabilities to truly outmaneuver them. My first step was to observe them, not just their actions against me, but their general patterns. My perception was now a weapon. I began to spend more time discreetly watching. I installed a small, strategically placed security camera at the rear of my house, ostensibly for general security, but positioned to capture their backyard and a portion of their side yard, as well as the shared property line. I spent hours reviewing footage, noticing things. Their dog, for instance, barked just as much when I wasn't around, not just at me. It was a general nuisance, but they'd trained it to ramp up when I appeared. I also noted the constant stream of delivery trucks, packages, food, sometimes large boxes, suggesting a lifestyle that didn't quite align with someone who forgot to pay their internet bill. Then came the true catalyst. One afternoon, while reviewing footage, I saw Mr. Henderson in his backyard. He had a small, portable speaker, and he was blasting incredibly loud, distorted heavy metal music. Not only that, but he was purposefully aiming the speaker towards my house. It was a deliberate, malicious act of noise pollution. My camera captured the time, the sound, the direction. This wasn't subjective. This was concrete, quantifiable harassment. This wasn't just about the Wi-Fi anymore. That was simply the spark. This was about their character, their desire to dominate and disrupt. I needed to find a way to expose that character, not just to me, but to the entire neighborhood in a way that couldn't be dismissed as personal dispute. I started by using my methodical nature to expand my network of quiet witnesses. My friendly neighbor, Mrs. Albright, had been one source. I began to cultivate casual conversations with other neighbors, not complaining about the Hendersons, but subtly asking about general neighborhood issues. Have you noticed more noise lately? Are you finding any litter on your property? I discovered that Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street, had also been experiencing issues with loud music late at night, and Mrs. Albright had mentioned strange smells emanating from their garage sometimes. Other neighbors, hesitant to directly accuse, revealed their own smaller complaints when prompted gently. They were like scattered pieces of a puzzle, and my role was to connect them. My next step was to leverage technology, discreetly. Maple Creek, like many suburban communities, had a nascent online neighborhood forum. It was mostly used for lost pets and selling old furniture. I started posting, not about the Hendersons, but about generic neighborhood concerns. Has anyone else noticed an increase in noise pollution on Elm Street? Concerned about some unusual parking habits affecting street flow. I remained anonymous, simply concerned resident. Then, using my patience, I waited. Slowly, other people started chiming in, confirming my observations. The Hendersons were creating problems for more than just me. They were just too afraid to speak up. This was the dissemination of truth I needed. I wasn't gossiping. I was providing a platform for shared, verifiable experiences. I had to continue to subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily, if only to understand the broader patterns of these disputes. The real breakthrough came when I started focusing on public records. My methodical mind knew that people who cut corners in their private lives often did so in their public ones. I subtly researched property records, local ordinances, and public safety reports related to their address. It turned out they had received several parking tickets for blocking the street, and there were a couple of low-level complaints about their barking dog that had been dismissed, but nothing major. Yet. Then I stumbled upon a truly critical piece of information. While looking up zoning laws for a project I was considering for my own backyard, I discovered a very specific ordinance in Maple Creek related to home-based businesses. There were strict rules about the type of business, noise levels, and particularly, customer traffic. And then I remembered the constant stream of delivery trucks to the Hendersons' house, not just Amazon, but unmarked vans, sometimes several a day. I started documenting these deliveries, noting the type of vehicle, time of arrival, and duration of stay. My security camera, now a silent, tireless sentinel, captured it all. My gut, my perceptive nature, told me this was it. This was the chink in their armor. The Wi-Fi excuse, the forgotten bill story, the claims of poverty, they were all a carefully constructed facade to explain away their lack of internet and their need for a basic utility. They were hiding something. Something they couldn't afford to have exposed. My methodical process now became a full-blown investigation. I reviewed months of footage. I cross-referenced delivery times with any unusual noises or activities. I even subtly altered my walking route to pass by their house during peak delivery times, pretending to check my mailbox, just to catch a glimpse. And what I saw, combined with what I heard and documented, began to paint a picture far more complex than simple neighborly malice. They were running something from their garage, a consistent, low-key operation that generated a surprising amount of traffic. And the forgotten internet bill, it suddenly made a chilling kind of sense. Perhaps they weren't forgetting it. Perhaps they were actively avoiding a paper trail or minimizing their digital footprint to obscure the true nature of their activities. The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit together, promising a much larger payoff than simply quiet. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling precision that only my methodical mind could truly appreciate. The constant deliveries, the odd hours, the quiet, almost furtive movements of strange vehicles arriving and leaving their property, it all pointed to one thing: a home-based business. But not just any business. The type and frequency of the deliveries, often late at night or very early in the morning, combined with the occasional faint chemical smell I'd sometimes detected on the breeze, suggested something beyond standard e-commerce or a legitimate workshop. And the Wi-Fi lie? It wasn't about forgetting a bill. It was about avoiding a digital trace, a permanent connection that could be linked back to their operations. My patient observation had revealed their true vulnerability. Maple Creek's zoning laws were incredibly strict about commercial activities in residential areas, especially those that generated traffic, noise, or any kind of industrial output. This wasn't just a minor HOA violation. This was a potential city ordinance infringement. And unlike the barking dog or the encroaching branches, this was something the city had to care about. My strategy was now clear, formed by weeks of frustration and fueled by my deep-seated motivation to expose manipulative personalities and restore peace. I wasn't going to confront them directly. I was going to use their own tactics against them: quiet observation, meticulous documentation, and strategic dissemination of truth. But this time, to the right channels. I began assembling my final dossier. My Maple Creek observations notebook became the backbone. I extracted specific entries related to deliveries, unusual smells, and late-night noises. I meticulously annotated each piece of security camera footage, creating a timeline of their suspected business activities. I even took high-resolution photographs of their garage door, which often showed faint scuff marks, smudges, or the occasional discarded packaging material that hinted at industrial use. I had concrete evidence of their parking violations, their noise disturbances, especially the targeted music blasting, and now strong circumstantial evidence of an undeclared, potentially illegal commercial operation. My next step was to connect with other neighbors who had expressed similar, but isolated complaints. I didn't approach them with accusations, but with empathy. "I noticed you mentioned the late-night noise on the community forum, Mrs. Rodriguez," I might say, casually. "I've been experiencing some unusual disturbances too. Have you ever considered reaching out to the city about it?" I offered my observations, not as gossip, but as shared data points. I became the quiet catalyst, the orchestrator of collective truth. My role as the quiet witness and disseminator of truth was finally in full swing. My biggest challenge was to avoid appearing vindictive. This wasn't personal revenge, not in the petty sense. This was about justice and protecting my peace and the peace of my community. I would not let them win by forcing me to act outside my character. Once I had compiled a robust body of evidence, I didn't go to the homeowners association again. I went directly to the city's code enforcement office. I made an appointment, dressed professionally, and presented my case methodically. I brought my notebook, a flash drive with the annotated video clips and printed photographs. I explained everything calmly, factually, from the initial Wi-Fi request, which contextualized their evasiveness, to the mounting evidence of an unauthorized business. I emphasized the impact on the neighborhood, the increased traffic, the noise, the potential safety concerns. I made it clear I wasn't seeking personal retribution, but enforcement of city ordinances for the well-being of the community. The code enforcement officer, a serious man named Mr. Peterson, listened intently. He flipped through my binder, paused on certain video timestamps, and asked pointed questions. My meticulousness clearly impressed him. He explained that a formal investigation would be launched, which would include surveillance and potentially a notice of violation. He couldn't guarantee immediate results, but he assured me they would take it seriously, especially with the level of detail I provided. This was a promise of progress, a payoff to my weeks of quiet work. I felt a surge of hope, tempered by the knowledge that the Hendersons were masters of evasion. The waiting period was agonizing. Every time I heard a delivery truck, my heart pounded. Every time their dog barked, I felt a tremor of anxiety. But my patience, now refined through prolonged adversity, held firm. I continued to live my life, but with a new sense of purpose. I even started engaging more with the online neighborhood forum, subtly encouraging others to report their own observations to the city, sharing general information about noise ordinances and zoning laws without ever mentioning the Hendersons by name. I was disseminating the tools for truth. Then, about 3 weeks after my meeting with Mr. Peterson, things began to change. I noticed fewer late-night deliveries. The heavy metal music, though still an occasional nuisance, seemed less targeted. There was a palpable shift in the air, a sense of tension emanating from the Hendersons' home. My security camera footage, reviewed diligently each night, showed something significant. A city vehicle, unmarked, parked down the street for several hours over multiple days. They were being watched. One morning, as I was stepping out to get my mail, a uniformed code enforcement officer, not Mr. Peterson, walked up to the Hendersons' door. He held a clipboard. I pretended to be engrossed in my mail, but my ears strained. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard key phrases. City ordinance, unauthorized commercial activity, repeated violations, and then distinctly cease and desist. My breath hitched. This was it. The grand payoff. Over the next few days, the activity at the Hendersons' house changed dramatically. The delivery trucks stopped coming entirely. The garage door, once frequently opening and closing, remained stubbornly shut. There was an air of frantic, desperate activity inside. I saw Mr. Henderson pacing his yard, talking agitatedly on his phone, his usual bluster replaced by a haggard, stressed demeanor. Mrs. Henderson avoided even looking in my direction, her face pale and drawn. The bad-mouthing, which had been a constant hum, had vanished. The whispers about me had been replaced by whispers about them. The true vindication came a week later. Mrs. Albright stopped by my fence again, Muffin trotting happily beside her. Her eyes were wide with a mix of shock and satisfaction. "Astrid, dear, have you heard? The Hendersons are moving. A moving truck is coming next week. Apparently, the city told them they couldn't run whatever business they had going on from their garage, said it was against code, and they owe a fortune in fines." She leaned in closer. "And you know, funny thing, a few other neighbors were saying they'd been complaining to the city about noise and weird smells too. Seems you weren't the only one who noticed things." My heart swelled with a powerful sense of triumph and relief. My methodical, patient, and perceptive approach had worked. My commitment to truth, my refusal to be a victim of baseless rumors, had paid off. The peace I had sought in Maple Creek was not just restored, but strengthened. The Hendersons hadn't just moved. They had been exposed, their manipulations laid bare, their disruptive behavior met with fitting, permanent consequences. My role as the quiet witness and disseminator of truth had not just protected me. It had protected the very community they had tried to poison. The Maple Creek neighborhood began to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The constant tension lifted, replaced by a returning sense of quiet camaraderie. Neighbors started waving again, conversations resumed over fences, and the general atmosphere felt lighter, more open. My own garden seemed to flourish anew, no longer under the shadow of their malevolent gaze. I learned that the Hendersons hadn't just been running an unauthorized business. They had been operating a small-scale, unregistered chemical processing operation that was, in fact, a fire hazard and environmentally unsound. My initial, seemingly minor grievances had, in a roundabout way, led to the discovery of a much larger danger. The truth, painstakingly collected and strategically disseminated, had prevailed. It was a powerful lesson. Manipulation thrives in silence, but with quiet, methodical action and the persistent pursuit of truth, even the most entrenched deceit can be unraveled. The peace was returned, earned through my unwavering commitment to exposing the true nature of those who would poison a community. And for anyone else who finds themselves dealing with seemingly insurmountable neighborly conflicts, remember, there are stories like mine, and many more, to be found. Subscribe to Neighbours from Hell channel for new Neighbours from Hell stories daily.